Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and a lot of times the arguments that people make on the left, or that people even make from outside the United States who don't really understand our culture, comes down to the Second Amendment. And a lot of people say things like, well, when the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, they intended you to have a one-shot musket. They are not talking about some of these semi-auto rifles, or a lot of people say assault rifles, and I've already covered in videos that these are not assault rifles by any military definition of the word. These are considered sporting rifles, or as Armalite, who actually designed the AR-15 and the M4 and M16 that the military now uses. That same company refers to this as a defensive sporting rifle. That is their actual official name for it. But in the context of that, I'm going to disagree based upon understanding the culture that these men came from, their ideas, and the other things that they wrote there. Now, anyone who's done basic research on the meaning of their wording and the historical context knows that when they talk about things like a well-regulated militia, they had no intention of the federal government having any oversight over the militia. They had no intention that the federal government would ever have any oversight over firearms at all. They actually expected every voting age male who owned property of any type to be armed and considered them to be part of the militia. That was their expressed intention in all of their other writings. Men like Thomas Jefferson wrote about that you were not even really considered a true citizen or a free man if you were unarmed. All free men and all citizens are armed. And these are the men who wrote our laws. These are the men who wrote the laws that we still follow today. And when we start talking about, well, those are outdated laws, well, we still follow the rest of them. If those are outdated laws that we don't need to follow, then I don't need to listen to the President of the United States. I don't need to listen to the Congress, and I do not have to follow any of the laws that they write, because their power is coming from that same document that is outdated. I don't have to respect your right to free speech, your right to religion, or your due process. If that's the case, if we're just going to strip away those rights, then I don't have to respect any of your rights either. In fact, if you have no right to life, I can just kill you. I haven't broken any laws if we don't need to follow the laws in that document. So therein lies our problem. So what is it these men were talking about? Well, they wrote the Second Amendment because their expectations were that there would be, if the government ever got out of line, that we would have another violent revolution. They wrote this document after a violent revolution in which they overthrew a government that they saw as tyrannical. Now, a lot of my European subscribers from my two channels don't understand that, because they don't come from a culture that is built on revolution. We revolted against the sort of culture and rule that they had over there, and still to some extent cling on to. We overthrew those governments violently and built our own and said, to hell with you, you're out of here. So they don't really understand our mentality there. That is what we were raised upon and taught since little children in this country, that these men were revolutionaries who fought a violent revolution to have a freer country. And then when governments get out of line, if they refuse to listen to the will of the people, you kill them and remove them. That is our culture and way of life, because that is how our country was formed. And our patriotism is based upon those concepts. And so for us, when we hear people over there complaining about their taxes, our response is, well, why don't you just overthrow your government? And instead of standing around bitching about it, overthrow them. And that's why we believe in having weaponry. Like, this has nothing to do with us thinking they're cool. The whole concept of the right to bear arms in the United States, there are several reasons, but the primary reason is to overthrow tyrants, to keep the government in check, and to have enough armed citizens to remove that government with force if need be, if it ever steps outside of line or outside of basically the consent of the people. So if you were to ask those men today and bring them up to speed with the current situation, do they think that people should have weapons like this? They would say, no, that is not enough, because the military has better guns. That's just, the military has ones that fire multiple bullets when you pull the trigger of the same bullet. So if that's what the military has, and that's what the police forces have, then that is what the actual property owning and voting citizens would need to have. And in fact, they would even argue that since you've taxed all those people and taken that tax money and bought all of these military grade weapons and police weapons, that as soon as those things go out of disuse or they've been used and you go to replace any of them, you need to hand them back to the people who paid for them. So any of the citizens who would want them, these men would probably make the argument that the government should be giving them their property back. It's our property, we paid for it. So they would probably make that sort of argument, that the citizens should have the same armament the military and police do, not less, the same armaments as far as small arms go, not necessarily the cannons and things. They didn't give cannons to every citizen, but they sure had the same small arms that military and law enforcement had. And that was the idea. So they would probably make the argument that every citizen who wanted one should get a surplus military M4 since they already paid for it themselves with their tax dollars. So if you understand the mentality of these men and their writings, that's more of the argument they would make. They would say, no, you shouldn't have that semi-auto. You should have a burst fire like the military does. In fact, you already paid for it. You should have one. So this idea that they're talking about that in a modern context, they would mean that just meant a single shot musket is just absurd. And it shows a profound ignorance of the reason that these men wrote these laws and a profound ignorance of their mindset and the vision that they had for the future of this country. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.